I'm Liz Powers. I'm one of the school counselors at Richmond School, and I work with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Just a little bit about myself. I've been here since 2012, and I have a 4-year-old daughter and live in Hanover. And just about this year, I would just say that I've really been kind of astonished by the dramatic increase in mental health issues among our population, and felt compelled to sort of reach out to parents. And so I'm so grateful that you all are here. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, John LaCrosse.
John LaCrosse. I'm the other half of the school counseling department at the Richmond Middle School, and I've been here a long time, 20 years. And my kids are all college. One is graduating this year from Wesleyan University, and one is teaching biology in Los Angeles. So I'm the other end of the spectrum. And I'm happy to do this. We've been doing this for a long time. I'm glad that Liz has reached out to the community and pulling this off. So happy to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And what I want to do is bring up a presentation that helps us to sort of begin thinking about sort of the suicide prevention curriculum at RMS and how parents can help to support it. Not only the curriculum, but really the suicide prevention aspect of it. So we partner with MindWise Innovations to utilize this curriculum that's specifically geared to middle school age students. And the context in which John and I have used this program is with the 7th grade guidance class. So we do developmental guidance lessons with the 7th graders for 1 quarter of 7th grade, once a week. And the topic is stress and stress management. And as part of that, we do sort of a depression workshop and teach specifically about identifying warning signs of suicide and suicide prevention. And even this year, we've talked a little bit about self-injury and how to sort of be an upstander and support others who may be at risk for either suicide or self-injury. John, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that 7th grade has been a great place to do this activity, to present this information. I think it's a time of transition. The kids are really open to the information that we present, and it is a tough year because they're really beginning to experience a lot more academic pressure, a lot more athletic pressure in a lot of different spaces. So I think we found that this is a really great spot to put this curriculum. And I really like the SOS piece. I think has been really, of all the things that I've used, it's been one of the most beneficial and easy for kids to understand. So I've liked this program.
And I will say, like, if there are any adults here that are interested in being trained in the SOS program, MindWise and Riverside Community Care offer regular trainings. It's about a half a day. And they're all over New England. I think they're doing online ones during the pandemic. So just know there are additional resources out there. But I would sort of say that this is not the officially branded mental health first aid, but it's the same philosophy that it's sort of that we look out for each other and make sure that someone who may be at risk for a mental health emergency gets the care that they need. All right, I'm going to keep going here. Oops, let's see. So obviously suicide can be a challenging topic for everyone. And I just want to make sure that, as we talk about it together, that we recognize that. And I want to urge folks to really take care of themselves. It's certainly not an easy thing to talk about, but it can be, if you need to take a break, certainly do so. This will be recorded. If you're more comfortable watching it later, that's totally fine. I also just want to make sure that folks know that there's help available. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is here, and I'll make these slides available after the presentation, so certainly folks will have these resources. There's also the ACT line 741-741. Certainly youth are in a position that they may prefer texting to talking on the phone. If you have a child who has a cell phone, it might be a cool thing for them to put in their contacts just to have that handy. You can also use this presentation as sort of a jumping off point. If you're not sure like when to bring up a conversation about suicide or how, you can say, oh, your school offered this workshop about the curriculum you're going to be studying in guidance class or that you have studied. And I just wanted to ask you, how did that go? Or, have you learned anything about it yet so far?
I think when we introduce this also, we're very clear with kids that we understand that a lot of people have connections to suicide in their extended family or more immediate family. And that's important for kids to understand. They generally aren't going to say, oh yeah, this happened to my uncle or this happened to my cousin, but we know that that is the case. And we want to make sure kids kind of acknowledge that in their head. So yeah.
Really good point. The other thing is that, John and I do have close contact with parents when we identify students who, are possibly depressed or have expressed suicidal ideation. And, certainly other students look out for one another and they often will come to us with concerns. But we want to make sure that they know it's not up to them to provide the support once they've sort of passed it off to us, that we work with families and local treatment to make sure that our students get the care they need. I want to actually acknowledge before I go on that the language of youth suicide prevention can be problematic. I have so much empathy and compassion for families who have experienced a loss by suicide. And I want to acknowledge that certainly not all suicides can be prevented. And, when there is a loss, there is a huge amount of guilt. And I don't want it to sound like there's any kind of blame, right? That we know that, a condition like depression is treatable if you recognize it, if you catch it. And sometimes it's very difficult to do that. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I have a lot of hope that treating mental health can help reduce incidences of suicide and prevent it in some instances. But I also recognize that it's super challenging and you can't say that categorically. The other piece about language that I wanted to mention is that it is a bit passé to say committed suicide or successfully completed suicide. So we do try to say died by or lost their life by suicide. And it might seem like semantics, but I just wanted to sort of frame that it's a way to kind of recognize the gravity of it. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what this program is for, but just so you all are clear, we're going to go over the youth suicide prevention basics. The acronym ACT, Acknowledge, Care, and Tell. What to do when your child may come to you with a concern. We're going to talk about building coping skills. And then also a variety of resources, including how to recognize specific risks for suicide.
And Liz, let me just apologies in advance. If we go over 7, I'm running a student council meeting at 7. So if I cut off at 5:07 to go to my student council meeting, that's why.
But I think we can do this, and I'll be here.
So. All right, just saying.
Okay, John, I know we haven't sort of talked about this, but do you want me to keep going leading, or do you want to take the next slide? Or
you are doing a wonderful job, Liz Powers.
Okay, so I want to sort of start by talking about why suicide happens, and it's really important and so basic, but really there's just this intense emotional pain. And, a lot of times untreated depression is at the core. And when I bring a concern to a parent about a child who's really anxious, part of the reason I try to intervene early is because untreated anxiety in a child can end up evolving into full-fledged depression by adolescence. And so catching that early really is important in terms of providing care. Drinking or drug use also can exacerbate. It's certainly one of those negative coping mechanisms, When someone is using drugs or alcohol, it can impair decision making, learning, memory, all the kinds of things that we know about. But it also can make depression much worse. It can, you know, making decisions more impulsive, all kinds of things that are tricky and dangerous. It also can help. It can really hinder the way that students cope with negative emotions. So if you are aware that your child is using substances, it's really, really important to seek support.
I think just to back up for a second, untreated depression, I think I would also add any mental health. I mean, there's a variety of other mental health conditions that could fit in there as well.
For sure. Thank you for that, John.
Yep.
Isolating and withdrawing, certainly that can be an aspect of it. Loss of hope. Sometimes it feels like the only way out, so to speak. When someone has access to guns, the suicide crises are often short term, but having the access to a gun makes it easier to carry out the act in an instant. Many people keep unlocked guns in their homes, making them easy to get, quick, and deadly for any young person. So you can reduce the suicide risk by not storing a gun in your home. But if you do choose to keep a gun in your home, keep it locked, unloaded, and lock and store the ammunition separately. I'm definitely not trying to be political by any means by bringing that up, but I just think it's important to recognize that 86% of youth suicides that are with a gun, the gun belongs to a relative. So definitely important. And then, of course, thoughts of suicide. Right. So just get my bearings here. How can we prevent suicide? We talk a lot about trusted adults at Richmond Middle School. And so I just want to kind of put that out there that it's a great conversation starter in general to talk to your child about who their trusted adults are. In sixth grade guidance class, we sometimes will make a friendship map where John and I will list all the qualities that make a good friend that students brainstorm in class. Someone who's trusted, someone that you have fun with, someone who shares an interest with you. But I think
and the variety of friends that they have. So somebody that's older than you, somebody that's younger than you, somebody, a pet.
Yeah.
The variety of people and non-people that serve the role of helping to support kids.
And the whole idea of this is to build protective factors, and those folks who are trusted adults actually serve a role that is a huge developmental asset for our youth. So having a candid conversation with your child about who could you go to at school if you were worried about your friend, and if it feels too scary to start by talking about suicide, maybe you talk about bullying. Because in a lot of ways, it's the same concept, right? Who could you go to solve a serious problem that's affecting yourself or one of your friends, right? All right, I do want to acknowledge that, there's sort of this history of stigma around mental illness. But I think the more we talk about the seriousness of mental illness and how treatable it is in a lot of the same medical ways that other conditions are, it can help destigmatize it. So I think regular and ongoing conversations is hugely important. And I know that we rely on parents for that, and then we continue the conversation in school. Just so folks know, as part of the in-school lesson on depression awareness, our students look at and fill out what's called a brief screening for adolescent depression. And it's just sort of a snapshot. So over the past 30 days, right, over the last 4 weeks, there are sort of 7 measures, and things like, have you felt like nothing is fun or that things just aren't interesting? But it's not a diagnostic measure, but it is a way to teach kids how to recognize those signs. And at the very bottom of it, we ask, if they want to talk to a counselor. We also ask who a trusted adult is for them at home or out of school, and then one in school. And for kids that don't have a trusted adult listed or they can't think of it, typically I like to follow up with them because I feel like it's so important. All right. So we talked a little bit about treatment for depression, and we'll talk about resources more. But there are definitely different ways to approach this. Sometimes it's environmental, sometimes it's talking to the pediatrician or receiving a referral for talk therapy. Sometimes it's a check-in with a school counselor. Other times there's medication treatments, and then there are just things that kids can do for their own resilience. We use the language happy and healthy. What do you do to keep yourself well? And we'll talk about more of those things in a moment. Healthy habits. I'm already getting ahead of myself. So, sleep hygiene, right? Is your child getting the recommended 10 hours of sleep a night? Are they drinking enough water and getting their physical exercise and eating nutritious foods? Is their body image, in a good place? All the kinds of things. Do they have good friendships? John, anything else I'm thinking of that's a big one
No,
right
I
now?
think you're next. I think when you talk about coping skills, I think I can fill in a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. And we talked a lot about connections to peers and trusted adults. You want to jump in with coping skills?
Yeah. So in our seventh grade class, one of the things we really try and normalize that stress is part of life and that ups and downs are part of life, so that people realize and kids realize that it's normal to have days where you are really sad or where you're really stressed out or you're really not sure how to cope. So they don't overreact when things get difficult. So they build resilience. I mean, that's all about building resilience. The healthy and happy is doing those things. Talk about why is it that some days you react really strongly to things and some days you don't. And healthy and happy is those things you do to be resilient. Exercise, eating well, getting good sleep, being with your friends, playing with your dog, listening to music. So those are all really important things that you do that help keep you happy or
We,
help keep
we
you healthy
we
and safe.
talked quite a bit about mindfulness in the context of seventh grade guidance. And frankly, I think it's something that more folks are talking about in other classes as well. And mindfulness doesn't have to be meditation and yoga. From a parent perspective, I know I will sometimes say to my daughter at dinner, can you tell me something you're grateful for? Or what was something that happened today that went really well? Was there anything that happened today that surprised you? And it's just sort of that reflection on, how did the day go? Is there anything that is bothering you? Those kinds of things. Just noticing what's around you. Certainly, there are more formal mindfulness things. We teach kids a little bit about the Calm app that they can access on their phones, or, that we do use a chime. And I have all kinds of what I call woo-woo things in my office, like essential oils. Some kids love that. Other kids are like, yeah, no thanks, right? So we'll keep going here. We talked about preventing access to guns, and then, of course, feeling hope, right? I always say that John and I are good complements for one another as counselors, that we both enjoy aspects of counseling in different ways. And, I think one of the strengths that he brings is things like student council. Having sort of those leadership opportunities and the student engagement is really empowering. And that can, provide a vehicle for students to really stay strong. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about what students are learning in school through the Signs of Suicide program. This is sort of a clip from one of the videos, and I'm not going to actually show the video, but I will say that they recorded new ones, and they have a really nice intro that's specific to the pandemic. And basically what this is role plays that show, the first one shows a boy who comes across as really angry, and it helps to demonstrate for students that depression doesn't always look like sadness. And it shows how sort of life stressors and environmental factors are one element of it. And then in other cases, we show a friend actually being sort of an upstander and taking their friend to see the school counselor. It goes through the warning signs in very organic ways. And in between, there are like clips from mental health counselors that just give factual information. So our students have the, really accurate information, and they can make good choices.
I think it's important to say in the process. So in this particular video, the girl in the orange has stopped doing some of the things that she likes to do, stopped going to band, has stopped showing an interest in some of the things, and the girl in the blue is asking her as a friend. And what happens in all the clips is that at some point the girl says, or the boy, that I want to die. I don't want to be here anymore. I just want to end it all. So that's what we talk to kids about. That's when the conversation shifts into something that is important to share with an adult. And your response is important, including telling an adult. So in all the video clips that we show, that's what happens, and that's what takes it to a different space.
Good point. Yeah. And it really is just a one class lesson. But this year, I think it's important to note, we actually did it with the 8th grade students. The next group of 8th grade students will be getting it pretty soon. Maybe next week even. I have to send the letter out to parents to let you know for sure. But I just wanted to emphasize that because I think John and I were not sure exactly what was ethical to do at the beginning of the pandemic in terms of suicide prevention work. And, looking back on it, it probably would have been fine to deliver remotely. But since we have this opportunity to deliver it in person, we decided to do that this year. All right. So if your child sees signs of suicide, they're learning to act. And this stands for acknowledge, care, tell. So acknowledge means, looking for those signs of and noticing the signs of depression or suicide in a friend, or frankly themselves, right? And that's the idea of using that screening so that they can think about maybe they haven't actually seriously thought about killing themselves, but maybe they are feeling extra tired, or they can't think as clearly as usual, and they also don't have as much energy, and maybe they have had trouble sleeping, or think that most other people are better looking or smarter than them. Those are all things that it's important to kind of address. Sometimes when folks are depressed, they can really be suffering both physically and mentally. Maybe their eating is off, they're eating too much or not enough. And I think it's really important. I always tell students that when the pediatrician goes through that suicide checklist with them, be totally honest. The other thing that the video does, by the way, that I meant to mention is sort of anticipates some of the things that are challenging for our teens. Like, there's always a question about, will my friend be mad at me if I tell an adult that they're suicidal? And that video is super clear. It doesn't actually matter if your friend is mad at you. You have to do it because it could save their life. And so I think just having that come through the video is actually really helpful. And kids are super respectful. I think the first time we used this curriculum was 3 or 4 years ago. And I was worried that maybe kids would make jokes of it, or maybe not take it seriously. And I should have known better. These kids are just so engaged and respectful. So that the C is care, show their friend they care. We talk about sort of being present. And John and I definitely encourage students to offer to go with their friend if they want to come talk to one of us. We also make it clear that any of the adults at school know that the protocol would be to check in with me or John or David Drazen, our school psychologist, or one of our administrators or the school nurse. And that, parents do have to be contacted when a student is suicidal. It's right up on my wall, kind of behind me in my office, that it just, that's one of the things where we really can't keep confidentiality because it's so important. And then that T, tell a trusted adult. So that's that piece. John, I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit about what you and I do once we hear from a student that there's a concern.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that we're going to do is investigate a little bit and find out a little bit more information. But in the end, we're probably going to talk to the student and let a parent know. So that is pretty standard protocol. Teachers have also been trained to come to us and let us know that as well. We often get referrals from parents as well. So parents are ones that say, I heard this from my son or daughter and want us to follow up. So eventually the information is going to get back to parents. We may also convene as a team. So Liz and I may confer with each other just to make sure that we both are on the same page, or that we do what we feel is most useful in that situation. But we're going to follow up for sure. Generally not with the student that made the report, but we'll follow up with the student for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some aspects of safety planning and planning for continued follow-up and care. In certain cases, it means making some accommodations or adjustments with teachers. And we don't, necessarily have to say that the student is suicidal. We can say they have a lot going on, and right now they're needing, some extra time to do their homework, those kinds of things. So we just try to make sure that kids are getting the help that they need. I will say that right now there's a critical shortage of mental health care, despite the valiant efforts of many of the providers in the Upper Valley. And so, when folks are sort of hedging, well, should my child go see a therapist? I always encourage folks to get on a wait list. And then when their name comes up, they can decide whether they want to do it or not. It doesn't sort of commit you to get on that wait list, but it could be quite a long wait, and you don't want to wait until things get much, much worse. The pediatrician is always a good place to start too, if you're concerned. Sometimes there's other factors that we can help negotiate. That maybe there's a kid who is having a conflict with other kids at school, and that's really weighing on them. So talking through this has been really important and helpful. All right, I want to just sort of go through some of the warning signs. Usually when someone is thinking about suicide, they are not necessarily secretive about it. There are some signs that are pretty clear. So anger is certainly one of them. Someone who has a short fuse or a temper, or they maybe just seem really irritable. That can often be a sign of depression. Big changes in behavior, withdrawal from family or friends. Sometimes we hear about people giving things away. Maybe school attendance is falling off, or school avoidance. Deciding that they're not going to do any extracurricular activities that they used to love. That's huge. Just feeling hopeless, just that there is no reason to live. That can be really pretty serious. Sleeping too much or less.
Not enough.
That sleep hygiene piece is really important. When I say sleep hygiene, it's sort of keeping regular sleep hours, getting enough rest. Sometimes when folks are struggling with depression, they struggle with the onset of sleep. There have been different interventions that people use, but we certainly recommend that devices are out of the bedroom at night. No screens within an hour to two of bedtime. And then, certainly in more serious cases, consulting with a pediatrician to see whether something like melatonin is helpful. But just sort of keeping that regular schedule is important. Drinking or drug use, definitely concerning. Experimenting with ways to sort of dull that emotional pain. We talked about overwhelming pain, which actually can be physical or mental. I think it's important to mention that sometimes when folks are depressed, they experience somatic symptoms like body aches and stomach aches, headaches. It's always important to rule out other conditions. So again, that pediatrician piece is key. And then talking about suicide, we know that students will text one another about this, or maybe make an offhand comment, that, well, maybe I should just kill myself. And sometimes a student will kind of backpedal and say, oh, it's just joking. And we have to kind of talk about that, in our community, even when someone is joking, we have to take that seriously and really make sure that they're safe.
It is interesting. One of the things that in our high tech world, we use Go Guardian at the school. So we are notified whenever a student does a search that has to do with death or dying or suicide. So both Liz and I have had a number of conversations with sometimes surprised students who, research, the top 10 ways to die. And, we're alerted that, this student did this search, and we will almost always meet with them and talk with them about what that was about. And it's almost always something innocent, but we pick those things up.
Good point. And we teach students about the power of listening to their friends and showing that they care. So explain, how you're like basically we want to teach active listening. So we have students practice, the kinds of ways to show that they're caring for their friends and showing concern. Some of the phrases we talk about, like it's okay to feel that way, other validating comments as well. Tell me more about it. I'm here for you. Also, like teaching kids not to sugarcoat it. And I think this is important for trusted adults too, that sometimes someone will say something that's kind of vague, like, they make a self-deprecating comment. And I think sometimes, if someone is cutting, you might be afraid to say, like, are you self-injuring or are you thinking of killing yourself? And it's important to ask that and get that distinction. I think it also, when youth are asked about this, sometimes we're afraid to bring it up, but by modeling the language around it and being assertive and showing care and concern, it actually is a huge relief for youth. If they're feeling that way, it's like it's okay to be not okay. If they're not feeling that way, they'll say, no, 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 I'm not suicidal. And you can tell that they're being honest. Just being there for them is really, really important. So we've talked a lot about the trusted adult piece. Anything you want to add here, John?
No, I think we've covered that. That's good.
Okay, cool. Definitely don't promise to keep a secret. I think one of the things that can be tricky is if we find out information. I had a parent a few years ago that like their child's phone was somehow tied into their family iPad. And so they were getting like all the iMessages, and they got information without their child knowing they had that information. And they're like, well, what do I do with this? And so I think, just to kind of put that out there, that you have to just acknowledge like, oh, I didn't mean to be reading your messages, but this came to my attention and now I have to address it. Right.
I think the only thing that I would add is also that I always try and tell myself there's a reason why this person said this to somebody, which really is an indication that they want help. Right. They're reaching out for help somehow. So otherwise they wouldn't have said it to anybody.
Right.
So
there's definitely like a lot of resources in the community. Just make sure that you encourage your child to seek help and really listen to their concerns. If it's about a friend, contact their friend's parents, share your child's concerns. Certainly feel free to contact me or John, or another staff or administrator, so we can support the child or the family. If it's an emergency, 911 is definitely a legitimate option for providing immediate safety. I am super impressed, by the quality of care that the Hanover Police and the Norwich Police have provided our community. It makes me nervous that I have definitely gotten messages from kids on weekends or late at night. And, you're kind of at the mercy of email. Like, and we're not on 24/7. We of course try to respond as best we can, but that is just really serious to make sure that it's taken care of in a timely and efficient manner. The other thing that's huge is really just reassuring the youth that they did the right thing in telling you. That sometimes it can cause some real anxiety because they're worried about their friend and they're worried about breaking trust or sharing a secret, and it takes a lot of courage. So I
And
just
there may
want
be repercussions for their relationship with that person,
yeah,
and there may not be anything to do about that.
right. Just remember, you don't have to be the expert, right? It's common to feel uncomfortable with the topic, but just by connecting with people who do have more training and expertise in this, you're doing what you can to respond to the situation. I'm not a doctor, but if I saw someone, um, that needed an ambulance, I would certainly call 911. And it's kind of the same thing. Um, I think it's also good to know that you can talk to a supportive adult before and after. And certainly, kids who have friends or siblings who are dealing with mental health crises often do come to talk to John and myself about that. We do maintain confidentiality with that. And we also can be a resource to make referrals for sort of ongoing care. Most importantly, just make sure that that we get the word out there that mental health care is important and serious and timely, and we don't keep secrets when it comes to um, someone who is suicidal. So this is probably my favorite part is the building protective factors. um, and so I think really just the thing that's been difficult about the pandemic is that all of the natural protective factors that kids access through their social networks in school and community were really kind of just eliminated. And I suspect that that was one huge factor in the increase in mental health concerns that we've had in our community. But now that things are opening back up, and we're a little bit more creative with things, I just would encourage students to stay connected in school, participate in different activities and clubs, teams, stay connected with their friends and family members. Now that grandparents are being vaccinated and most of our adult population is vaccinated, kind of, making those connections once again is really, really important. John, you want to take the next part?
You mean about ready to listen?
Sure.
Sure. So I think that it's really important for your kids to know that that you'll be there for them to talk about how to resolve issues with their kids, with their friends. That you'll listen to whatever it is that they have to say, and take it seriously. But also let them guide those discussions. That's really important. Let them own the discussion, but also know that there are sometimes things that you're going to have to do. And there's a reason why we want them to come to adults, rather than there are some problems that really need to be supported by adults, not just by their friends. So, yeah.
For sure. And actually, I think you were going to talk about the coping skills too, right?
Sure, I can do that. So like we said earlier in the beginning part of this section, we talk to kids a lot about resilience and doing those things that help them cope with the everyday stress that comes up for them and really is a normal part of life. And we ask kids to really kind of design their own kind of coping skills menu. And that may, for many kids, include exercise. It may include music. It may include playing with their dog. It may include video games. It may include whatever. It's unique to every kid, but it's important for them to know those things because we also talk about adults. We say, when things get difficult, when you get really busy, when you have a lot to do, when you have a lot of tests, you sometimes forget to do those things that help keep you strong. And it's important not to forget those things. So Liz and I will often talk thick skin, thin skin, that you do those things that help make you thick skinned, that help you cope with the things that are difficult. And also recognizing that varies depending on the day. If you come to school and you had an argument with your brother or sister, that's going to affect how you cope with the stressors of that particular day. And if you can identify that I had an argument with my sister this morning and I'm a little bit out of sorts, or I didn't sleep well, or I forgot to eat breakfast, or I have a headache, or my ankle hurts. All those things are going to affect how you cope with things during that day. The more we get kids to think in that vein, the better they're going to be able to cope with the challenges that happen every day to them.
And when we teach kids about coping skills, we will tell them that one of the reasons exercise works so well is because it's a release of cortisol, which is that stress hormone. Um, and interestingly, crying is another way, that tears help release that. So when someone is experiencing high levels of stress and they're crying, it actually can sometimes be very cleansing and refreshing. I think the other thing I sometimes end up talking to kids about is using coping skills that can be like a reset. So if they're having a moment where they're feeling overwhelmed or that they can't focus, or there's some very other uncomfortable feeling, that maybe going out for recess instead of just sitting at your lunch table in your classroom could be that reset you need. If you're in class, maybe it means walking to the back of the room, lifting your mask up and drinking some water, or, coming to see a counselor and saying, "Hey, can I take a mask break outside?" Those are all ways to kind of cope through the day. All right. So, I would just say that sometimes when we're talking to youth about mental health, it can be tough. That sometimes the kids will say, "Oh no, not this again," or "I know, I know, I know," or maybe the youth are feeling embarrassed or ashamed, or I think just letting your child know that they can talk to you about anything, like, "Do you have any questions?" or "How are you feeling?" Being a little bit vulnerable yourself, you know, saying, "Well, you know what? I would say, like, on a 1 to 10 scale, like, today I'm probably like a 5. I just did not sleep well last night." Being able to share those kinds of things with your child can sometimes open the conversation.
And what you do about it. So, that I think is really the key. So acknowledging that you're a 5, but also, well, what are you going to do about it? How, well, I make sure that, I went for a walk after work, or I played with the dog, or I played with you, or I watched a television show to shift my mood. So that's really important.
And I love this, sort of asking open-ended questions, right? Um, that sometimes just if you ask your child, "How was your day?" What are they going to say? "Fine, good," right? We actually do an exercise in 7th grade guidance called "Hey, how are you?" And they have to use other adjectives to describe how they're feeling. But saying, "Could you tell me something that happened today?" Or, what was the lesson today in social studies? Asking those open-ended questions is kind of important. I love what, John said, that helping steer and facilitate the conversation so that they come up with a solution is important. But, a lot of times it's empowering for the youth to come up with that themselves and not necessarily to be the one that comes up with the solution. Just being available. We all have busy schedules and it seems like there's not enough time in the day. But, just a quick, "I'm around if you want to talk later," or, "Can we go for a hike this weekend?" You know, I definitely find the walk and talk is great. You don't necessarily have to make eye contact, and that can feel a little bit more comfortable. Sometimes bringing up a conversation when you have other kids in the car. I know we're probably not doing too much of that right now, but if you're doing the soccer carpool and you ask, "Well, what's the worst thing, that you've seen on Instagram?" And kids will bring up their thing. And that's not necessarily suicide, but I think just having those conversations about what's going on in your child's life then makes it easier for them to bring up issues about mental health. We've talked a lot about how it's okay to ask about suicide. It certainly is a myth that it might like put it in someone's head. Oftentimes, when folks who are suicidal are asked about it, it can be really validating so that they know that you're empathetic and understanding, you're not afraid to help. It's a relief. So there, I talked a little bit about this in direct questions. Do you wish you would go to sleep and not wake up, or do you wish you were dead? direct questions. Have you thought about killing yourself? I know when I have a child that says yes to that, I will ask them, do you have a plan? Do you have access to guns? And that then gives me a little bit more data about safety planning. I recently had a student who told me that they had a whole stash of pills, and that's something that we have to address and take seriously. Obviously, an immediate parent call is in order for something like that. So there's lots of tips for getting teens to talk. Teen-led family meetings, is definitely one way to do that. Playing a game can just be more comfortable. Talking about things that come up in TV shows. There was definitely a lot of controversy a few years ago with that 13 Reasons show that was on Netflix. But it was a conversation starter about, what did they do right? What did they do wrong? What would you do? Those kinds of things. I think we've already talked about a number of these things, but
Yep.
John, anything you want to add there?
No, I think that you come up with your own ways. This is really challenging for many families. Never feel like you're the only one whose teen doesn't want to talk to you, because I would say that a lot of people have this issue, but coming up with tricks is really useful. And being ready when it happens, I think that's really important, because when the conversation, sometimes you got to drop things because your son or daughter wants to talk then. Can't wait.
Yeah. So, looking out for those warning signs, seeking help immediately. Just remember, like, the emergency department is a go-to. Alice Peck Day actually has a nice partnership with West Central Behavioral Health right now. So they sort of can fast track some of these mental health emergencies through their emergency department. Dartmouth Hitchcock has, been providing care as well. It's definitely challenging when there are fewer beds because of the demand, but we're working really hard that when students get to the place of a hospitalization, that, when they come back to school, we do reentries and we try to put accommodations in place and really try to follow up. It makes a big difference. So be open to helping your child with coping skills and being supportive. Talk to your child about suicide. Be ready to listen, and just sort of reinforce that acknowledge, care, and tell. I do think that acronym can be used for a lot of things. We're using it in the context of suicide, but same thing. Like, ask your child, do you know anybody who has injured themselves on purpose? What would you do if you found out that your friend was cutting themselves? What would you do if you saw another child getting bullied on the bus? I think all of those are really kind of transferable skills. So interestingly, this is sort of a public health model that is a nice way to kind of sum this up, that, we're all working together to prevent youth suicide. The schools and communities, certainly the hospitals, and this graph shows that the rate of car accidents has actually gone down quite a bit in the last 15 years, whereas the rate of suicide has gone up slightly. And of course, there are lots of reasons for this, right? There are safer cars, safer roads. Maybe there's better driver's ed, stricter licensing requirements, stricter drinking and driving laws. And there's also been just a lot of public health messages. I think, it's a sort of a challenge for us to think about the things that we can do as trusted adults, in other words, parents, teachers, and school staff, to prevent suicide. I think it really truly is one of those things where it takes a village. And I want to thank you for sort of accepting this invitation to partner with the school mental health staff to keep kids safe. I just want to be really accessible. Certainly we all get busy, but this is something that we drop everything for in the Richmond school community. If folks are looking for additional information, there is actually an SOS parent page. So you can go to sossignsofsuicide.org/parent, and you can actually look at the clips from the program videos, and you can learn more about the program that your child is receiving. I know some of the newsletters that have gone home in the Friday Focus are actually from this website. So if they look familiar, you may have already read them. If you wanted to look at sort of the brief screen for adolescent depression, there's a parent version so that you could sort of figure out, if your child is struggling with depression. So this is one of the handouts that's on there.